Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Museum of Applied Arts and Sciences at the Powerhouse Museum. My name's Tristan Sharp. I'm Director of Programs and Engagement here at the museum, and I'm standing in tonight for our Director, Dola Merrilees, who sends her apologies. Unfortunately, she couldn't be with us tonight, but it's my great pleasure to be here in her place to introduce our guest speaker tonight. I'd like to start by acknowledging Australia's First Nations people as the traditional owners and the custodians of the land, and I give my respect to elders, past and present, and through them to all Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to the museum this evening for what will be a wonderful presentation from our very special guest, Alice Black, co-director of the Design Museum in London. And Alice, welcome to you. There you are, I've lost you, there you are. You were there a moment ago. I'd also like to acknowledge the museum's trustees in attendance tonight, our President, Professor Barney Glover, our Deputy President, Lisa Chung, and of course, one of our other great trustees, Janet McDonald. Welcome to you as well. I'd certainly like to welcome in the room our colleagues too from the other cultural institutions. Many of you are here, many familiar faces. It's wonderful to have you here with us. And key members of the design and architecture communities from both the education sector and industry, of course. Tonight presents another fantastic opportunity to hear from an internationally renowned colleague about their experience in developing and delivering a significant cultural infrastructure project, a building, a museum. And if done correctly, can bring the organisation to life for its staff, but most importantly for the community that it serves. In February, we hosted architect Sir David Adjaye, who shared his experiences in building the new Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, DC. And this evening, Alice will give us insights into not only building a new museum in London, but moving one as well, which is no small feat. And very importantly, connecting with a wide range of stakeholders and audiences to come along on that journey. Our team here at MAS, as you well know at the museum, has been presented with a very similar and rare opportunity to consider how our cultural institution might evolve for the 21st century, with a new flagship campus in Parramatta in one of the fastest growing regions in Australia, Western Sydney, of course. The design process for us is very critical to this journey that we're about to undertake, and not just the design of the building, which is extremely important, but also the design of what might take place inside that building each day once the construction is complete and those doors are opened. As part of our planning for the new museum, we've been undertaking human-centred design thinking sprints with cross-departmental teams made up of staff from all levels, skill sets and experiences across the museum, and we call it MAS Next. These design sprints are exploring ideas and best practice for what a museum could be in the 21st century and beyond. And this of course includes audiences' experience, but also importantly for us, it includes what the museum as a place to work could be into the future, what our team culture could be, and what our ways of working together might be. 200 people with many, many important roles focusing on one purpose, the museum's overarching purpose. Teams have been exploring what we call neighbourhoods, the building blocks with which to consider the new aspects of the development of what a new museum could be. Things such as experience and wonder, innovation, research, playing and learning, and social connection. And we've been rapidly prototyping these experiences and testing them with our visitors in the museum here on the floor. So to help us plan what they might well be, but also to get insights into what the processes of those sorts of developments could be for us as a team and a staff, and how we can use those ongoing every day into the future. We hope through this sort of design thinking, our museum will transform itself into a responsive and more agile organisation, that it's able to grow, to take on new opportunities as they present themselves, to address different demographic trends, to transform a social landscape, and not least, the changing landscape of the cities and the state, which we will be an integral part of and a committed part of. When Alice was giving her masterclass to the UTS students yesterday, which was a fantastic opportunity for them, and thank you, Alice, for supporting our future young designers and architects, she said of the recent relocating of the Design Museum London that it was part about convincing everyone that they had the right to comment and engage. And we here certainly welcome and look forward to doing that with all of you here and to many others as our new museum journey continues. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Alice Black. Alice graduated from ESSEC Business School in France and began her career in banking in New York. A very good place to start for a museum, I think. Formerly head of strategy and planning at the Imperial War Museum and curator of the Churchill Museum and Cabinet War Rooms, she has an in-depth knowledge of museum strategic thinking and operational issues. In September 2007, Alice was appointed Deputy Director of the Design Museum with a brief to develop audiences and increase self-generated income. A very big challenge for all of us on both fronts. This brief was later expanded to include exhibitions and programming. Alice has led the museum's project to transform the former Commonwealth Institute building in Kensington High Street into the new home for the museum, and in so doing create the leading museum of contemporary design and architecture in the United Kingdom, and probably the world. I think your ambitions would extend to, Alice. Alice was appointed as co-director of the Design Museum in London in December 2016. Please welcome with me Alice Black.
I'm just going to pour a little bit of water because I'm going to speak a lot. Thank you very much, Tristan, for this lovely introduction. And I am absolutely delighted to be here today to give this presentation. It's my first time in Australia, and I've been here for, 2 days. It's so exhilarating. I can really sense that there is so much power and importance given to culture. There's some fantastic institutions that I've seen in my meanderings around Sydney, and tomorrow I'll be going to Melbourne. I can see that there is a government that is committed also to supporting the arts. So I hope that what I'm going to say today gives you some idea of, and a few clues about how to undertake a bigger capital project. I think it's a great opportunity for Mars, and I'll certainly be watching you from afar. Abraham Lincoln said, the best way to predict your future is to create it. So about a decade ago, that's what we set out to do. In the midst of a very rapidly changing world, the Design Museum decided it was time for it to grow up. We were, I'd say, a teenage museum, had been for 20-odd years in the east of London, and we were about to step on to a bigger stage, become a bit more of an adult museum, and develop ourselves to really reach out to a much wider audience. So at the heart of this undertaking of the creation of the museum in Kensington High Street was this idea that design is not something that's the preserve of specialists. Design is actually, it matters to everyone, and all of us are agents and actors in the design world in which we live. So we wanted to tell that story to a much bigger public and needed a bigger stage to do that. So I will go over the story, but first I want to go back in time a bit and give a little bit of context to what I am going to say. You know, there are three ideas that inform that narrative. It's about change, because the last decade in the world and in Britain certainly seen incredible change, really huge social upheaval, and we've not seen the last of it, I don't think. It's about really looking at the world in which we live and making sense of it. And it's also, in this particular case, it's a very British story, because design is something that Britain is good at. So let's start with the story, and it starts in 1851 with a great exhibition in Crystal Palace, organized by Prince Albert. And this was a celebration of industry, of the creativity in Britain, and demonstrating to the wider world what Britain was capable of. And really, this is the birth of design as this sort of mass-produced world, incredible ingenuity, new technologies coming on stream, and commerce, because design is a very commercial activity. So we fast forward a little bit, and we get to 2008, and the financial world collapses. And it creates a real vacuum in Britain, because no longer was the financial services the most powerful industry in Britain, the generator of economic wealth. The government started looking around and wondering, what else have we got? What's in our toolkit? Because the city is no longer working. So in a funny way, it actually helped us, because the thing that they found was working and was doing incredibly well was the creative industries, and design is a key part of the creative industries. And this is a little chart which shows the growth value added, so the weight of the of production in the economy. And you can see the black line right at the top is the creative industries. So they generate a huge amount of wealth. They employ around Britain 1 in 11 people in the workforce. They generate 87 billion growth value added. And the UK is the third largest exporter of cultural goods between China and the USA. Tiny little city, but they're between gaming, movies, theater productions, and obviously the tourism and all the museums and galleries. 4 out of 5 reasons why people come to Britain is to see museums, galleries, and the heritage of art. So it really has weight. And what that did was that all of a sudden the government paid attention and thought, oh, we've got to do something to make the most of it, given that other parts of the economy are not working all that well. And then when we continue the story of incredible things happening in Britain, a year ago, British people voted to get out of Europe, which is pretty staggering. The cultural sector actually voted, people polled in there, 96% in favor of staying in the European Union. We employ a lot of European nationals. The trade there is critical. We send our exhibitions touring around Europe, but there is a real schism in Britain around that. So really reflecting, the change in culture and people's mindset. And we continue, and then the government did, fold. A new prime minister is elected who wants a strong mandate for Brexit to negotiate from a position of strength. And she goes to the poll, and it just doesn't quite work out in the way that she planned. So I think right now there's so much uncertainty as to what's going to happen over the next few years, and certainly there's a huge amount of lobbying in the creative industries and design. The Design Museum, we are all gunning for at least a softer approach to Brexit, but who knows? Things might change. I'm just going through that quite quickly, just to say that the society is boiling. There's so much going on. And I think in a way it gives way to what museums, galleries, cultural commentators have to say to the world, to also interpret and make sense of those conflicting currents in which we live. I would have personally preferred if Grace and Perry had formed a government instead. And he certainly did try. Theresa May was trying to form an alliance with the DUP, but sadly it didn't. But Grayson Perry is a huge advocate for culture. He's a potter, ceramicist, sculptor. Famously said, life without art would be a series of email. And I think it's so right. And so, Grayson, key character in London, and the Design Museum, very much based in London. And again, creative industries, cultural sector, fundamental in London, but it's a position that is under a huge amount of competition because Sydney is not sat on their hands collectively waiting for shows to come from there. There's huge amount of creativity and amazing museum worldwide, so we can't rest on our laurels. We need to continue to invest in culture, and there's a lot of similar issues actually that in my conversations with people I've heard. Property developers buying up, commercializing of a lot of the cityscape, culture feeling like it's being pushed out. Certainly artists and designers no longer able to live in the city centre because it's too expensive. And in a way, the story of the museum and how we relocated from East London, sort of up and coming, edgy, back into the West, was very much about London trying to bring back, or a certain part of London trying to bring back culture, creativity, designers, and the borough of Kensington and Chelsea tried to do that by encouraging the Design Museum to move back, but I'll go through that in a minute. So London is a very busy cultural landscape. No one needs another museum in London. So to cut through is extremely hard. But there's a mayor who really has a very strong vision to make London a 24-hour city, to make sure culture continues to be well looked after, and that there is access for everyone. So that's incredible support for us. And obviously in London, there's still strength in the creative industries. So that's the sort of landscape and context for the Design Museum story. And now I'm going to look a little bit more specifically in the history of the Design Museum. Bit of a flashback. And to give you the sort of the very quick timeline, early 1980s, Sir Terence Conran creates the Boiler House project, and then 2016, we move and treble in size, moving from Shad Thames in East London into Kensington. What's interesting about this period of about 30 years is that it really charts the rise of design as much as an economic activity, a cultural activity as well. One where, today there's so many museums programming design, from the V&A to Somerset House. Everybody is doing design exhibitions because there's a real interest in it. Back in the 1980s, there was only really the Design Museum doing it. So now it's part of the cultural discourse, and people are quite well used to it. But still, there's more we can do to bring more people to encounter design. So, mentioned it, the Boiler House project. This was actually a room in the basement of the V&A. And Terence Conran and the first director, Stephen Bailey, took it over and started staging exhibitions about the making of cars, the making of mega brands either. Coke was one of the last ones. They also did exhibition where they had one quite controversial on taste, where they put things that they thought were well designed on beautiful plinth and things that were poorly designed on dustbins. And after 5 years, the curators at the V&A decided enough. They didn't want this sort of upstart doing crazy exhibitions in the basement, and the lease wasn't renewed. So, kicked out. And Terence acquired this banana ripening warehouse on the embankment of the River Thames and proceeded to do it up. At that time, there was nothing around it. I think there was a car park, but the city hadn't caught up with this. These were the docks, the old docks, and it was pretty much everything was derelict like that. It was opened, though, in 1989 by Margaret Thatcher, and you see Terence there in the middle, and the first director on the right. And after 26 or 7 years, it looked like this, a nice Bauhaus kind of a museum. And we did mostly temporary exhibitions, changing, and we had 2 exhibition spaces, in a shop and a cafe. And it was about 3,000 square meters. It was pretty tight, and we were really oversubscribed. And people told us they wanted more. They wanted more of the design museum, more exhibition, more learning programs, but we were simply maxed out. We couldn't do any more. Meanwhile, 7 miles west, another story was unfolding. So this is the Kensington High Street. You see it going diagonally across there from Olympia, which is a sort of a trade show area, all the way to Kensington Palace, Kensington Gardens. And there is this beautiful park in the middle and a high street that wasn't doing particularly well, because just a little bit further down after Olympia, Westfield had opened, and it was just draining all the life from the high street, and all the shops were moving there, leaving the high street to ossify, because it became only an area where you had very high-end resident flats and houses, and not much else. And Kensington decided that they wanted to do something to regenerate this area. This area in the 70s was the temple of cool. You had Bieber, you had design shops, you had artist studios, but by the early 2000s, all of that had left for the reason I said earlier. Basically, there was just, people just couldn't afford to live there, so the shops had gone, the artists had gone. So there was this building, that's a view of the high street. In the sort of middle of the high street stood this building, the former Commonwealth Institute, which had been built in the 1960s, but stood vacant for 10 years because the Commonwealth Institute decided to stop its activities there and do different types of activities in the countries of the Commonwealth. Commonwealth Institute was a permanent exhibition of all the countries of the Commonwealth, and it was largely an educational venue where school children would go in droves to understand what the Commonwealth was and understand what this concept was. But by the early 2000s, the concept of Commonwealth starts losing a little bit of its potency. At the time, Britain's looking more towards Europe. They might have, thought to come back recently, but Anyway, the building was empty, and a property developer had bought the site and wanted to develop some high-end residential. Why not? It's the right place to do that. The borough, the only leverage was this site because it was a heritage site, it was listed, so it couldn't be demolished to leave room for the property developer to build their building. So the quid pro quo that they did was to say to the developers, fine, refurbish the site, do the shell and structure, find a cultural user, and by the way, we'll help you because we want the design museum to go there, actually, and give it to them for 175 years at a peppercorn rent, and then you'll be allowed to do your development. And they did just that. So this building, which has a spectacular architecture, a hyperbolic paraboloid roof, really one of a kind in Britain, and the beautiful sort of central atrium from which you could see all the parts of the roof and the displays around. So this was given over to the Design Museum. And we created a partnership to find a way to take on the building, because although it was given to us for 175 years, and there was a fair amount of cost involved in redoing the structure, we had to fundraise for the interior fit-out. And that was about £50 million that we had to fundraise. And we didn't have any government support. We're an independent charity, so we had to find the money ourselves. We did eventually get a little bit of government support. So I'll show you what we did to the building, and then I'll tell you a bit more about how we did it. So that's the building as it was. And let me go back. That's what we started doing. Actually, this is the structural work. We took all the cladding out. We actually took all the floors out. We created a double basement, 7 meters deep. And then the only thing that were left of the building were the roof and the perimeter columns that go all around. And actually, on this picture, the building is not even on the ground. It's supported by pillars underneath, because at the same time as they were taking the floors out, we were digging the basement underneath, and then we built, top and bottom at the same time. So the structural work that had to be undertaken was enormous, and we had to watch very closely the movement of the roof, because there was a very small tolerance. The building could collapse on a very windy day, so had to be, it was really sort of a high rope while walking. And that's how it looked when we took everything out inside. And we then proceeded to redo the brick plinth underneath, change the cladding to have a cladding that is, in fact, weatherproof, because the previous cladding would let water go in, so for a museum it's not great. And also that was a cladding with some fritting so that UVs wouldn't go through. 2 sides of the facades are see-through, so you have beautiful views onto the park, and 2 sides are opaque because they have a direct vis-a-vis with a residential building around them. And then we recreated the floors, and that's a cross-section of the building. So originally the building had 4 levels. We added 2 mezzanine, and as I mentioned, this double basement, because we wanted in the basement to have a gallery, full height exhibition space. We also have an auditorium, there's also a plant room and our collection store. On the ground floor, we have one of our temporary gallery spaces, the shop and the cafe, of course. On the first floor, all the learning spaces. So when in the previous museum, we had about 90 square meters of learning spaces, and this one created 450 square meters of seminar rooms, workshops, and because we knew that was a central part of our activities, and it's so central that it's at the center of the building. And we also have a library there and the museum's office, and then on the top floor, the permanent display, which is free for all visitors to visit. A beautiful restaurant, and a separate gallery that we use either for exhibition or for events. So these are I've done the before, I'm doing the after now. So there's beautiful views of the building and the roof from the park, and you can see the residential building that are, not insignificant, but frame it. And we stood there on Holland Park looking at the back of the building. This is the entrance with a little fountain. And again, side entrance. So there are two entrances. One is from the park, and then there's one from the high street. And as you see, there's a building on the high street, but the first 2 floors of the buildings are open, so you can see through. And we've got a shop as well, just to signpost that we're here. I mean, we had to think really hard about the commercial activity of the museum, as I said. We don't get much government funding, about 2% of our budget, so we needed to create a resilient museum. Hence, of course, the shop, the cafe, and all the various activities and programs that we do at the museum. And that's the entrance. And so this is the atrium. So you've seen the original atrium. This is quite different. I should say that John Pawson designed the interior of the museum. For those who know John, he's the king of minimalism. But so what we had to do, because of the listing, was preserve the openness and the atrium. But we also needed more floor space than there was before to have our exhibitions and all the activities in the rooms that we wanted. So we created more rectangular openings, but made sure we would preserve the views of the roof. And that's the view from the other side. And using the wood, so it's all oak wood that you see, really softens the atmosphere of the building. You've got a big concrete roof above you, some huge concrete pillars on all sides. So this wood creates a really warm atmosphere, which is very welcoming. And that was, again, something that we wanted to achieve. We wanted to say to people, come in and just hang out. You can just sit on the steps and grab a coffee if that's what you want to do. It's fine. And then if you want to go and have a walk around, you can do that and have a walk to Design and Make a User, the permanent display, or go see the exhibition. And I think the use of the wood, of the lighting, has created this calm but very warm space for visitors. So just to show you a few of the activities that we have dotted around, this is one of our residency studios. We have 2 residency studios on the top floor, and every year we have 4 designers in residence who come in, work with us on a brief. We give them a bursary, we give them money to realize their projects, and it's typically designers who are out of university 1 to 5 years, and it just helps them, give them a first foot on the ladder. Then they're exhibited at the museum, and it helps launch them into their professional practice. And then we've been running this program for 10 years. And one of our first residents is the architect Asif Khan, who's now joined the Design Museum board. So this is our lecture theatre. the library, so quiet spaces where people can just walk in, work from. Actually, we'll even allow, we're going to put the rare books in a different space and allow people to have a drink and come and just work from the library. It's a lovely and calm space. This is the shop and the cafe. So that gives you a sense of what the museum is, and now I can talk to you a bit about how we did it. So first, the vision. And really that goes back to Sir Terence Conran, who back in the 50s in Britain decided it was high time to teach Britons how to live. And he imported really the continental lifestyle into Britain and said, you can surround yourself with better things, better design things, and make your life a lot better. So Habitat was the first shop that he created. It went on to have many, many more shops. But this sort of design vision of what design can do to improve your life has been with him all his life. That's him a few years ago. He created the Design Museum, and that was very much, again, with that ethos, that mission of educating people about what design is, what design does. And here he is with the other trustees and the Duke of Edinburgh, who opened the museum in November, just over 6 months ago. So they were the people who stood behind us and really helped us to make it happen. They reached out through their networks. They were really, we put them to work really hard to advise us, to provide us, with a guiding framework and proper governance, because it was really a massive undertaking. Luckman Arnold, who is second from the right, had been appointed chairman of the board in 2005. He then appointed Diane, the other co-director, in 2006, who appointed me in 2007. And there we went, starting. So that's how the organizational structure looked way back when I joined the museum. We had 36 people working at the museum when I joined. And I'd say we were sort of jack of all trades and master of none. People did so many different things. And one of the key things that's happened through the life of the project was that the museum professionalized itself a lot. We had to bring people with deep skills to help us really achieve the goal that we had set ourselves. So this is on the terrace there, the small team of design museum staff, and now in 2017 we're about 120 people at the museum, a lot more, and a lot have joined actually quite recently. In the last 6 months, I think we've brought in about 40 staff. So that's huge. And I'll come back to it in a moment, but really it's fundamental to be very clear on the vision, mission, values of the museum, because otherwise, when you bring that many people in, you stand no chance of having them all look into the same direction and do the same thing. So we had to drill that into everyone. But more than staff, one of the big revolutions for the museum has been volunteers. And we also have 120 volunteers working at the museum, and they do all manners of things. They're welcomers. They are also, they work with a collection. They help in the library. They help with exhibitions. They help also in the exhibition. And that was pretty much from a standing start, and it has extended the reach of the museum and the power of what we do by providing this human contact which is one of the key successes, I think, of the museum. And many people have told me that it's such a nice experience. You walk into a museum and there's someone who stood there who smiles to you and say, hello, how are you today? And these people are volunteers. They choose to be here. Some are there just on a Saturday morning, some a little bit more. But when we did our research to find out what's the make or break of a good museum, we found the one thing is a positive human interaction. That can make someone's visit great, or it can make it pretty disastrous if people don't care. So we really try to develop that in the museum, so you'll see them. And people gain skills, and they do that because they really want to do something. So they need to have, our volunteers need to have a great experience and do something that's valuable for them. But the other thing was, during the period of the construction, we had so many consultants and construction people. I think we had over 100. So there was over 100 consultants. I did the counting, and then like 150 operatives on site, building the building. We employed consultants to do things I didn't even know you needed a consultant for. By the end of it, we had a Bible of all the names of the people, the access people, the logistics people that helped us, the collection, accessioning, because our collection was quite small and we didn't have a head of collection, so we had to learn about how to, we'd done it before, but sort of haphazardly and not very, very well. So it's enormous. You go from 35, 36 people to all of a sudden just being the conductor of a huge team, and they all have to sing to the same tune, and that was not very easy. So it took a lot of time, a lot of meetings, and I just, so there were some good meetings, there were some less good meetings, and some people enjoyed them and others not particularly, so you can see that. But it was just the amount of communicating you need to do for people to get the message is quite, is something to reckon with. I would send emails, weekly, bi-weekly basis. We had museum updates for all staff on a monthly basis. We had steering groups, and then we had workshops to think about how many toilets might we have through the building. But, oh my God, misfire on the toilet and you ruin the whole museum experience. So we did spend quite a bit of time thinking about this. You want to also spot who the change makers are. Who are those people who are with it and are just going to sing and be the proponent of it all the way through with energy, because this whole exercise of change is grueling, and there's so many moments through the almost decade of the project where people felt, we're working too hard, this is going nowhere, and what's the point of it all, and we won't get the money, and so you get those moments of despair, and it hits everyone. So you just need to have mechanism to keep pumping people up, and you do it through others. You do it by spending quite a lot of time with those workshops, with the training as well, and regrouping. So, this is something not to underestimate, the amount of time that this takes. So I spoke about the vision, mission, values. I'm not going to go into too much detail there, but I just thought I'd put them here because with our trustees, with the staff, obviously, with a professional team, with our designers, we spent a lot of time trying to workshop what is it that we're trying to create through the design museum. So our vision was to ensure people understand the value of design, and we would achieve that by creating the most exciting and engaging design museum in the world. everyone, that's the vision. We've got way to go. We haven't quite achieved that yet. But it's really that ambition to say it touches absolutely everyone. You don't have to be a specialist, and it really has an important value to all of us. So when we, worked up through that, and that remains true to this day, fundamentally, we think that the future won't work without design, because our planet's resources are finite. There's so many issues that we're faced with, from water shortages to, wars, climate change. How are we going to tackle all this? How are we going to colonize Mars, if that's where, we need to find our way to? Well, design will play a vital role in that. So it's really important that everyone understands it. And so we developed our DNA, and really working collaboratively, working with others, working with design practice, giving people a voice to engage in a dialogue was very important when we were thinking about developing our program, and indeed the building. And these are the values that we developed. We have to be enterprising, because all of this will not work if we cannot find a way to sustain ourselves. So we had to find the way to, create value out of out of our building and out of our program. But as I said at the beginning, there was a fundamental belief that design is for everyone. So we needed to really find out, why does everyone not come to the design museum? Because in our previous museum, we had about 200,000 visitors a year. So that leaves quite a few who are not coming to the museum. So we spent a bit of time with Post-its, and we brought people in, and we asked them what they thought. So we brought different kinds of people. Also brought children to try and understand what their expectations were. We brought people who were familiar with us. We brought people who were not either. And we showed them what we were hoping to achieve. We had made a sort of a 3D model that we looked through. And I had a lot of audience engagement points to try and understand what we were doing well and what we were doing not so well. And one of the key things was this sort of barrier to entry. People said, well, I don't know if I'm going to like it, so to come here to the Design Museum, I have to pay £12. It's a risk. And if I don't like it, I'm not sure. So one of the key things we did was to have a permanent display that would be free for everyone. And in particular, free for those who don't know very much about design. Because it was to just give them an idea of what it is. And hopefully then, if you like it, you'll be more willing to come back and then to pay your admission ticket to see an exhibition or attend a talk. So having spent quite a bit of time talking to all our audiences, we created this segmentation because it's important to just picture who it is, and everyone's sort of a bit amorphous. So we created our own sock puppet. That was part of one of those workshops when we came to grip with who they were, and they all had characteristics. So we knew what would make them tick and what they wanted to see, and what we had to do to convince them. So top row, the progress checkers and the pilgrims from abroad, they're our niche. They're our designers, they love us. They are either in the UK or they live internationally, they follow the museum, they like what we do. We need to do a certain type of program that is going to engage them. So it needs to be exciting, engaging, a bit more niche perhaps. Whereas those two, the once-in-a-lifetime tourists and the giving us a go, they are, in London for the first time, they might decide to do something else than just the British Museum and the Natural History Museum, or they're on a day tripper from the southeast or the home counties, coming to do something. They might have read something about the museum, so they're giving us a go. We've got one chance. If we miss it, they'll never come back. So we had tall order not to miss that first opportunity to engage with them. And with them, we need to talk a very basic language. Drop all the acronyms and the special lingo about design and just try to explain in normal, everyday word what it is. And then on the bottom row, you have the formal learning groups. They're obviously a key constituent that we had already, but we wanted to expand. The London must do, they live in London, as it says, and whatever is the hip thing to do, they're there to do it, and they consume it. The culture group is sort of younger in age, is a bit trendier, and again, for them, it needs to be an experience. And finally, the local socialite, which was absolutely not in our previous audience makeup, because in East London, they don't go there. But in West London, they live there. And so this had the potential to be sort of their third or fourth living room, because they'll go out for lunch with a friend, and they want somewhere nice to have a cup of tea and maybe catch an exhibition. And maybe a program on how to do your interior, your home. The number of people who ask, "Oh, that wood, what is it? Where did you buy it?" So I did, tell them it's Denison. Lovely. So we had a pretty good grip on who this sort of audience makeup was, and we set out to really develop programs for families, engagement, and always moderated, because it's not just, put a few pens, crayons, and something to draw on. You need to explain what it is, but do it in very nice settings. So have it in rooms where you have a beautiful view out, where you connect it also with the inside of the museum. The learning groups continue to be, already all our learning activities are fully booked for next term, so they've come in droves. And this group, very important to us, because they're the teenagers, so you no longer get them through school. They're no longer coming either with their parents, so they're really hard to reach, hard to engage. But actually, design is something that can interest them. So trying to plug into that sort of 16 to 19 age group, it's really hard, but for us was really important. So what we did was, they don't come to the museum, you've got to go where they are. So we, through community centers, we developed, and we've got a program of young ambassadors as well, got them busy, created projects and selling their wares on Portobello Road, because it's literally just up the street. So, and we've developed programs of talks and activities really to cater for the different groups, the different kinds of talks for different kinds of audiences. As I said, so socialites is perhaps more home improvement. Others might be, digital design, user experience, a bit more professional development. And really, so far, what we've seen is a real appeal for what we've done. We've had over 500,000 visitors in the first 6 months since we've opened. And lots of people, also different kinds of people from those we were having, who visited us before, older visitors, because we used to be very much in the 25 to 35 age group. And so it's more anecdotal, I'd say, at this stage, but we've just commissioned a big audience survey to really get into deep, to really understand, are we matching to what our expectation is, and, are we doing a good job, or... or where can we improve? Just a couple of slides really to say that the whole thinking about audiences and interaction with audiences became quite scientific. We've got several levels, and we had to understand at which point do we provide what service, because again, it can be very puzzling for people if you walk in, you're expecting something and you don't find it. So you know you need to have your ticketing right there, but once you're on the top floor, you need to find someone, because what if you forgot to ask something to the person who was down there? You don't want to go all the way back. So we really took a forensic look at all of the spaces of the museum and try to understand what are those various points, what do people want. And the way in which we did that was to turn ourselves also into visitors. So halfway through, I sent all of the teams visiting exhibitions. They could pick anywhere they wanted, and they had to just recount their experiences across different sort of tables, and then they had to buy a cup of coffee, buy a souvenir, and then they had to send me a postcard telling them, the one thing they loved about their visit. So that every so often, actually, we stopped, paused, and thought again about the kind of experiences that we wanted to provide to our visitors. There's a very strong sense of welcome. So I'd say every 12 to 18 months, we had what we called audience days, and we just lift our heads above the plans and the consultant reports, and just sense checked, and not just the design museum team, but we brought all of our professional team on board, and then we brought also members of the public just to check that we're going along the right way. And audiences obviously is not just the physical audiences, it's also the digital one. We have quite a lot of followers on Twitter, so we took the opportunity also to engage in a dialogue with them. And they became very important when we developed the permanent display designer, maker, user, because they were asked to nominate their favorite objects, the objects that they would like to see in the design museum. But we also encouraged them to support us in our move from east to west. So we had this little map from the old museum to the new, and each of these colors and dots are actually representing an object. And you could donate £1, £5, and that would move the object a little bit closer to our new collection store in Kensington, and then you'd get a little film. So we had a kettle, made it, and also my first Sony. The iMac was actually the one that people supported the most. It went round, I think, 15 times. It went there, back, there, back, there, back. So people loved it. And there were really funny little films that accompanied it. But people are really active on social media. So we wanted to try and harness that and obviously pass the message on that the museum was moving. Just a word about designer, maker, user, because it was really the biggest shift in terms of program to do an exhibition which tried to introduce design to non-designers and to do it for free. So I mentioned asking on social media, what objects would you like to see in the design museum? Well, we put them all on this wall at the entrance of the collection display. And this is one of the most successful bits of the museum. People stand in front of it because in there you find a mop and a bucket, a garden chair that stacks. You also have a Burberry coat. You have Levi's 501s and Olivetti typewriter. So just a complete array of 220 completely different objects, that people have selected themselves and that they think, or good design make their everyday better, or they have a special connection to, and it so resonates with others. And so that's the first bit where they stop. You know, you saw it in an earlier slide. We wanted to get people to stop and think afresh about the world around them. And that really does that. It stops everyone in their tracks. And they think, I'm coming to a museum and I'm seeing a mop. Why? So then we can take them through the story with a little timeline to just give a sense of how things have evolved. And then there's 3 sections, designer, in the center there's user, and then maker, which is about manufacturing. So what we wanted to do was to show design not as a typology, so here's all the chairs that we have, and here's all the computers that we have, but as actually a group, it's different things. So in this first section, you see bits of architecture. You have a gerberette, a replica of a part of the structure of the Centre Pompidou. You have also a big motorway sign, you have a Vespa, you have graphic design, you have user interface in the form of the Harry Beck map. So you see the old tube map in London, which doesn't make any sense to anyone, and then you see the Harry Beck map, and finally you understand how you go from A to B. And we wanted to show that richness and explain what the designers' work do, that sort of principle of iteration. And there is also the going into manufacturing and how that is changing. So you see there's a chassis of a Model T Ford suspended, and also everything from the craft to the mass-produced design. And we have our own version of the evolution of species on that back wall there. It's the evolution of technology wall. And we wanted to show how technologies have merged. And you see typewriters, you see televisions, and you see joysticks, and CDs and vinyls, and all of this is, coming together in the center of the display into a smartphone. And this is what we carry every day in our pockets. The display is incredibly successful. People are just going around there, and there is a lot to see. One thing that was really hard for was, it's still to this day, people say, it's a bit pedestrian. Vespa, another Vespa, really? Haven't you got anything better to show? You're the design museum. And that type of comment comes often from designers, and they're expecting to see something much more arresting. But this exhibition is not for them. And I had to say that and repeat it to the board any number of times, because by the time you know all this, you're past it. So you're going to go to the exhibition, and we did an exhibition, Fear and Love, which was very much the manifesto of where design is today, about social media and robotics and all that. So that's for you. But this is the intro, is the gateway into design. And if you put the context to such a complicated level that you're going to lose 90% of your visitors, well, that's a big own goal. So, it's been something, but I'm sure we can adapt. This is something that, we can change the pieces, and I think we will do. But it's, it was complemented also with a program of exhibitions. And really, if you think about the museum as a sort of a multiplex, where at the top you've got your basic gateway into design, and as you go through the museum, you get into deeper and deeper degrees of knowledge of design. So Fear and Love, that first exhibition, so you had this sentient robot that followed you around whenever you approached, and it was reflecting a little bit on this idea that robots might replace us, will take our jobs. So what do we do? How do we learn to live with robots. We talked about artificial intelligence, how we kill intelligent animal on the planet, but try to recreate intelligence in machines. We talked about sustainability. So that was a much more demanding exhibition when we opened, and that was really throwing it out there to the design community, just challenging a little bit about what the current issues were. So we've done an exhibition on Imagine Moscow, Soviet architecture to celebrate the centenary of the Russian Revolution. Design Museum, we want to be topical. So you might say, well, imagine Moscow, buildings from 100 years ago, buildings that were actually never built. How does that fit into the relevant today? But it does, because that was very much, we took 6 buildings that were indeed never built, but they were all dealing with issues with which we're still grappling with today in terms of building for density, building and creating a transport network, well-being, how we look after our bodies, how we look after ourselves, buildings for family. When the Soviet regime needed women to go out and work, so what do you do with the children? How do you create a new kind of home? So incredibly modern, contemporary issues, but dealt with in Moscow 100 years ago. We opened also with Designs of the Year, our annual competition, where we look at the most innovative design around across 6 different categories, from fashion to architecture to graphics and product transport and so on. The winner this year was the Better Shelter, done in collaboration with IKEA. And this is the current exhibition, California, Designing Freedom, so tools of personal liberation. What is quite surprising is all of these tools, so from the iPhones to Google, Facebook, Twitter, the self-driving cars, it's all emerging out of California. How is that? What are they eating over there that is making them so creative? Well, we look back at the 50s and the 60s and the counterculture, which created a generation of designers who just tore the world apart and put it back together, created new platforms, and then let others just go wild with it, created some, incredible new ways of living, of traveling, of creating communities. So that's a very, it's a fascinating exhibition. There's lots of different kinds. You've got a big surfboard in there. You've got a, we have the first working prototype of Waymo, the self-driving car. We've got one of the LSD stamps that in the 50s people took to free their minds, and it's behind glass. You can't lick it. And then looking forward to our forthcoming exhibition in November, we'll be looking at Ferrari and this incredible design story. Works of incredible precision out of the racing world. And it's quite interesting. On the one hand, you've got the self-driving car. On the other hand, you have the most advanced cars. But I think both will continue to survive. Actually, if anything, there's a bit of a hollowing out in the middle that's happening. So how do we react to that? Well, that's a question that we're asking ourselves. So, looking to wrap up and the learnings, of which there are many, and some of them I won't share with you. So, an incredible loss, really. I think one thing certainly that I have learned is to ask questions. And even the simplest question, just ask it. Because if people can't answer them in a way that makes sense, then you should you should worry about it. So when construction teams and their operations director were telling me, oh no, this lift, hydraulic, no. Like, I don't understand, but explain to me why my lift is not working. So if you can put this into English, and better, if you can fix it, we can carry on having a conversation. But I think you just have to challenge all the nonsense that people and consultants might try and feed you. There is a huge amount of detail that you have to become cognizant with, and different languages that you have to learn. So you have to learn the language of the construction industry, the language of the architects, the language of the lawyers. Oh my God. Just absorb so many contracts, and to begin with, some of it, it just didn't make sense. But again, I wasn't afraid of asking questions, and I had to understand, and the worst thing you could do is just pretend that you understand and then make some big mistakes. Keeping staff motivated throughout was really, really hard, because sometimes the end goal feels so far away, it's a bit demotivating. And bear in mind, we had to keep two sites going. We had the museum in East London, which was open until June 2016. We then closed for 4 months and reopened in November 2016 in Kensington. So those people who were just working with a museum in East London are like, well, the new stuff, it's not about me, and why should I care, and feeling a little bit remote. And then some others who are so disconnected from the day-to-day of their life, it's hard for people to feel part of one group. But you just have to invest the time and the social time, as well as the meetings and the workshops and all that, just bringing people together. There's no way around it. I'd say also, whatever you think the issues are going to be, they're not going to be those. So, one, which we were really worried but for the longest time, was there's going to be a building in front of the museum. So yes, you can see through and everything, but maybe people won't find us. On the first 2 days, we had 17,000 people come to the museum, so they found us. That was not a problem. There were other problems. There were other things that completely took us by surprise. So this is the museum when there's an event at night. It's the #1 party space in London. Because of this sort of circular organization of space with the atrium, it's the best people watching you could do. So from everywhere, you've got a great vantage point and you can see across. So this has been incredibly successful, and we've had a huge amount of events. But it's not all good and perfect. So designer, maker, user. Case in point, it was really it was hard, because halfway through we realized it was just not working. It was wrong, and we did listen to the feedback. As I said, we brought people in, we asked our peers, we asked audiences, and what we had developed for the first 2 or 3 years, they told us they just didn't like it. It was twee, it was not connecting with them. We had to scrap the whole thing and start again, which thankfully we were a little bit delayed on the construction, so we had time. We could accommodate that. But I think, at times you have to make those decisions, and it would be such a disaster, really, if you continued knowing that this is not responding to expectations. Another feedback that we've had from visitors is, but your permanent display is so small, because it's about 600 square meters, and they compare that with, say, the Victoria and Albert Museum. You've got, gallery after gallery of free collection and some small temporary exhibition spaces. But they also get, I think, 40 or 50 million from the government to support that. We don't. So we get £170,000 from the government to do some educational activity. So, but people don't know that, and frankly, it doesn't matter. So we've got to take that feedback and do something about it. We've got more space. We can animate the atrium, and we're certainly thinking about doing that. I don't think anyone, you open your doors and you get everything perfect first time. But I certainly think that we've got a good, first go. We've created a good platform, and now we have 175 years to just make it better. So we just, we have. All of our communities, this was from the opening of the museum, really felt such a strong support in London, in the UK, but also more widely. And we really value the feedback and comments. So do get in touch and tell us what you think, because that's how we're going to get it just right. And the last thing is really, so this was the opening on the first day. Terence cut the ribbon, and it's really the vision of one man, and all credit to him, because he believed it. He supported the museum for such, since its creation, really. And he's there at every board meeting. He comes to talk. It's wonderful to have that with us to power us through. That very first day, I have to say, my husband said to me when I set off to work, he said, it's okay if there's no one coming in. People don't necessarily know that you're open yet, so just, don't take it personally. And I was like, oh, okay. Because you put so much of you into a project like this. But luckily, we opened, and on day one, there were people. We opened on the Thursday, and there was plenty of people that went through, so it was just a lovely feeling. So there we are. Thank you very much.
Alice, thank you very, very much. It was absolutely wonderful to take us on that journey. We do have time for some question and answer, and I think, Alice is very, very keen herself to get feedback from everybody. So we're going to have some roving mics, and Alice, I'll leave you to take on a few questions.
I'm interested from a fundraising perspective. So you obviously raised those funds via the capital campaign. Have you sort of got a strategy for continuing the relationship with the donors and all the people that gave as part of that?
Of course, of course. For us, there are survival. So what was interesting with this project was that the Design Museum, traditionally, we were very good at sponsorship, so getting money from corporates to support exhibitions, because obviously there's always a connection with a subject matter. But individuals, not a lot, we didn't have. But through this capital campaign, most of the funding came from individuals and trusts and foundations, which are, are very often close to an individual. So it allowed us to develop this relationship and continue. So absolutely, we've developed also some, circles of friends and patrons, and do activities, take people on studio. But you have to, it's a lot of work. It's constant. Relationship building, and but it's very, very important for the museum because also they're all in some way connected with design, so they're passionate about it. So they're always also very good advice in terms of thinking about exhibitions, program, or who we might want to talk to. So it's something that we really started, and absolutely we're going to continue for forever.
I just had a quick question. Just regarding collaborating with other cultural institutions in the precinct, maybe you could talk about one or two initiatives and what you've achieved through those.
So one thing that I wanted to do was to sort of have a family and create a new family by the time so we'd arrive in Kensington, open our doors and feel that we're already quite established and rooted. So we created a group of cultural institutions, but we also involved the local authority, Kensington and Chelsea, to get together so that I could tell them about what our plans were and hear what their plans might be in terms of programming, in terms of marketing, so that the arrival of the museum would be a benefit for everyone, because we had a big campaign to launch the museum. And it was, really focused on the design museum in Kensington, because that was the number one message for people to understand that we were moving from East to West London. So it would have a massive benefit to all of the other institutions if they rallied around us, because then they can position themselves. And the important thing was to create a destination. So, because lots of people, and say tourists, will think, okay, I'm going to be in London for 3 days, so I'm going to spend half a day east, half a day west, so what do? You want to maximize your time, so we wanted to give them the ready-made. So you go to the Design Museum, go visit Leighton House, which is a lovely house, literally 50 yards from us, do a bit of shopping on the high street, have a drink with flamingos on top of. So there's so many actually activities that we thought we wanted to establish that. And obviously there are big institutions like the V&A, the Natural History Museum, the Science Museum. It's 20-minute walk from the Design Museum to South Kensington, where they are. So I did a lot of briefing, again, to all of them, so they knew what we were working, and so perhaps our program can work together. There's a network of the South Kensington Museum, and the Design Museum is a part of that as well. And so we share information also from everything from operations to human resources and other things. With the V&A, obviously, there's such a close relationship, because we started there and now we're back not too far from there. I think half the staff of the Design Museum comes from the V&A and vice versa. So there's so many exchanges between the two institutions that it's great, actually. And this year, so every year in September, there's the London Design Festival. So lots of design activities throughout London. The hub of the London Design Festival has actually been the V&A for a long time. And because we were so far east, it was sort of hard to connect with all the program. But now that we are where we are, so we're really part of the activities, and we're doing we're staging some little displays, and we're much more closely involved.
I'm a qualitative researcher, and I work across many different sectors. I'm currently engaged in a customer experience exploration for a museum in Australia, and exploring the customer experience and the nature of it and what people want from it led me very quickly to a philosophical question, which I'd be interested in your comments on, which is, what is a museum for? Clearly, each institution has a set of values and mission and what it sets out to do as an individual institution, but as a category, what do you feel museums are currently for?
Big question. Right, okay. It's fascinating, and actually having built and opened the museum, we just 2 weeks ago had a big away day with our trustees to think exactly about that. Think, okay, now we've built the platform and we're starting with our programming, but it's time to revisit because that vision has spurred us on for 10 years. We need to revisit that, refresh perhaps, and think about, the next 10 years. And so you immediately grapple, well, certainly what the design museum is for, but what museums are for. I think museums have been for a long time seen as custodians of objects and heritage and that telling that narrative. Now more and more getting into the whole interpretation and stories reflecting who we are as societies and using their collections to do that. But I think there's, in a world where there is so much digital stuff, and we're always, I don't know the stat for how many times we look at our mobile phones and how we communicate with others through social media, through WhatsApp and so on. There is a place actually for human interaction, for that encounter. Lots of people go to museums with others as a social activity. And I want to see actually the museum for that human interaction. First of all, because you come very close to objects that have fascinating stories from thousands of years ago, but stories about men, ingenuity, the incredible inventions. So it's very much about us, and then it's all the process of sharing and trying to do that. Of course, there's space for digitization and having collections and giving far and wide access to the riches that all museums have. But I think we have to hold on to this thing of, I want to think about the museum as a market square. And you're coming there with your stall and you're going to see some exciting stuff. You might have a conversation with your partner, with the person you're visiting with. That's the richness of that, and I think that's what museum can organize so well. So I want to retain that. And then really thinking about the design museum and what we are for, it's really looking at the world, looking at our humanity through the prism of design and architecture, and trying to get people to understand the forces at play. Really, I don't think we're there to predict the future, because if we did, we'd get it wrong every time. But I think what we can do is look at what's happening right now and try and decode that and tell people, look, pay attention to this. So this overwhelming of data that surrounds us, what is that doing to us? What are the dangers? I think we should have a commentary on that. So I would like the design museum to be that museum of now that really shines a light on those important issues that help you understand the world you live in, but not just. Make you into an agent of change, because we've got the power to change in making different decisions about our everyday.
I've got a question about up here.
Yes.
Thank you for your compelling presentation. I've got a question about moving from the east to the west. And you obviously established a base there. It's a culturally deprived part of London, and you've gone back into an incredibly culturally well-endowed part of London. How do you maintain connections and outreach back to the place where you started?
Yes, well, by the time we left the east of London, it became pretty gentrified. It was quite residential with beautiful apartment buildings as well. That's the story of London. All those hip places. You look at now Hoxton and Shoreditch. Again, creatives are being pushed out because it's hip, and so rents go up, and it becomes harder to live there and work there. So the East London where we were was not necessarily the fringe. I think we were concerned that the design community was maybe not going to follow us. I don't think that's happening. I think they have come with us because it matters to them, the design museum. But what we've seen is a different kind of people coming in. And actually, if the design museum's relocation serves the purpose of bringing back a little bit of vibrancy into Kensington, a bit of a different kind of people, it wouldn't be a bad thing. Because, it's a little bit too samey. We've already noticed, because in talking to shops around the area, they've seen more people come in. And as I said, for the moment, quite anecdotally, I see different kinds of people. We need to establish that with a bit more research. But I'm also working with the Mayor of London to develop those creative enterprise zones and retain all the fabric of creative industries and culture in the centre of London, because it would be such a disaster if all that went, because that's what creates the richness of London. So, there's so many institutions, and there are institutions, and always, I think, for us also, we were looking at opportunities. That building existed, it was there where it was. The big advantage also for us was that in Kensington, you've got buses going up and down the high street, several tube stations nearby, good connection with the trains as well, whereas in Chatham, you were sort of at the end of the line, so it was not as easily accessible. So, I think hopefully we'll bring a different kind of people to West London. And, I should say, we also have a program of outreach in London, but also out of London. We're doing some work in Hull, in Birmingham, with schools. Because, I could go on forever, but basically the government has decided that design and art is no longer important in the curriculum. So they're only focusing on sciences, technology, English and math. So these subjects are completely dropping out. But we're going into schools and around the regions to train teachers, to run programs, to make sure we have the next generation of designers. Because again, it would be such a disaster if not. We can't do the job of the government, but, we can do a little bit. You want to? There's someone at the back, way back.
I was wondering what you thought about the future of the museum in an online space. Is that a plan?
Yes, so I'd say we were quite focused on building the bricks and mortar. So most of our online activity is on social media. And we do a fair amount because, as I shown on the slides, we have 4 million followers on Twitter and lots of Facebook fans on Instagram. What we find is that because designers are well networked and plugged in, they really follow us, and we've got lots of people in our social media sphere who have never been to the Design Museum, may never come, but actually contribute regularly to our program. So we run Architecture Fridays and Font Sundays, where we give a theme and we encourage people to send us pictures, and people go wild. And there's no end of, again, so we get fonts from around the world, so sometimes the theme is Shakespeare, so a variety of things. And so at the moment it's been very much a sort of dialogue and engagement. We are in the process of cataloguing our collection. Our collection is not enormous, it's 3,500 objects. So they were sort of catalogued, but not completely. So we need to finish that, and then our ambition is to make it accessible online. But very much to think about what else do we do online, because it's not just a replica. I'm not super fond of doing exhibition, doing a version of your exhibition which is physical, doing it online. I think doing film is very important because that's what people tend to consume a lot. And I want to think about digital not as a thing that you do, but actually digital is something that is part of everything that we do, part of our exhibitions, part of, how we broadcast our information. But, it's still, we're still developing our thinking there.
Thank you very much for that. That was fascinating. You mentioned you've got 175 years to get it perfect. What's your process for implementing sort of iterative design on a smaller scale, say exhibition by exhibition? Yeah, that's my question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So each exhibition, it's its own project. We develop, we're developing our program, for 2019, 2020, and we're trying to consider, a program also that makes sense in terms of the mission and what I've said I want the design museum to do, or how it relates to its audiences, and each time it's a new thing. So obviously we learn from previous exhibitions. One thing that we've learned, with Fear and Love, we wanted to have an exhibition that would be really challenging and really aimed at the design community. But for some people, it was a little bit too challenging, because if you didn't have enough of the context and background knowledge and happen to get there inside, buy a ticket and see it, it was perhaps a little bit hard work. To just get the meaning. So yes, there was a bit of video and there was a bit of text, but I think lots of people have said, we just want the voice of someone, the curator, in our ear, just to take us around and just give us, again, that personal intro. And it doesn't need to go on for an hour and a half, but it just needs to take me around, and for those people who want that, that's great, and those who don't need it, well, they won't take it. So that's really something that we're looking at and how we do it. And I do like the idea of podcasts really with the curators, because there's nothing like the voice of the person who's created the exhibition to take you around and to inspire you. The other thing that we're seeing is that we're in the entertainment business. So we are, of course, we curate very, I think, intellectually solid exhibitions, but some people come for the show. And you need to give the show. You need to give that sort of, theatricality, and perhaps not to every single exhibition, but I think it's a dimension that perhaps we've neglected a little bit. Because, there's always a danger that you end up being too worthy and too much in the ideas. And again, you ask people to have read the catalogue to make sense of the whole display. So that's a little bit hard work. And then, it's how we work with designers, because each of our exhibition is designed by a different team of exhibition designer and graphic designer, because we want to give the opportunity to a lot of designers to work with us, to have that opportunity to create an exhibition. But it's just how we brief them and how we work with them is always something that evolves through each exhibition. So one more question, and then I think we'll wrap up.
You mentioned that you have quite a small collection.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just wondering, now that you have bigger premises, is it a priority for you to expand that collection, and if so, how are you planning to go about that?
So we've got bigger premises, and we now have a collection store on site, which is first in the history of the museum. But I'd say I want to acquire objects for the collection, but objects that will have a use and that will be on show. Don't want to acquire to store. I mean, there's so many institutions who have fabulous collections, but you don't see them. I'd much rather borrow theirs and show it in my museum and then return it, and to borrow the next lot. So rather than start, becoming bulging up. But certainly we acquire, and we acquire for our exhibitions. We've acquired for designer, maker, user. And actually in designer, maker, user, it's not all our own collections. We've got long-term loans in that exhibition. And, we've acquired one of the original LGBT flags for the California exhibition. A great story, also the Whole Earth catalogue. But because we wanted to display them, and it was incredible to be able to acquire them. But I don't think we'll end up having a vast collection. Thank you.